I mean, I know some phases are there. Has everybody gone through the code card problem statement? Yes. Pakka na? Generally, it will be useful. Otherwise, आधा समय उस प्रॉब्लम को समझने में चला जाएगा. फिर आगे आते हैं. प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व कर पाते हैं. आगे. और कॉन्फ्रेंस हर जगह वहाँ पे टेबल से डालने का ही. One more question, I think last समय कुछ ये था वेब के लिए वैलिड है कि नहीं वगैरह, तो अभी कुछ ख्यालात ठीक हैं या still there are some questions? Hey, then I can actually answer that. So are we good on that side, right? क्योंकि हम लोग ये डिस्कस ही नहीं कर रहे कौन सी लैंग्वेज में इम्प्लीमेंट करना है, राइट? जैसे when you solve a maths problem, so there are so many books on how to solve a problem. Proof कैसे लिखते हैं, तो उसके लिए ये जरूरी नहीं होता है, राइट, कि whether you know calculus or not, but how do you go towards solving it, वो ज़्यादा important होता है. तो ये वैसा ही है. It's irrespective of whether you're working on back end, front end is immaterial. और रादर मैं कहता हूँ कि फ्रंट एंड में ज्यादा डिजाइन होते हैं जो तुरंत चालू हो जाते हैं the moment you start the framework. Even back end, there are so many questions जो आपने वो देख के आंसर करना चाहिए. I think
so let's start by quickly reviewing the problem and the design principles that we will talk about. So this is about problem statement on domain is simple. How we price goods at supermarkets or shops. Think of it as a grocery shop. Some things in supermarket have simple prices. Like can of beans for 50%. Other things have more complex prices like 3 for $1, 1.99 per pound, buy 2 get 1 free. This kata involves no coding. The exercise is to experiment with various models for representing money and prices that are flexible enough to deal with these and other pricing schemes. At the same time, are generally usable at the checkout, stock management, order entry, etc. Spend time considering issues such as does fractional money exist? When, if ever, does the rounding take place? How do you keep an audit trail of pricing decisions? Do we need to? What are the costs? Is the cost and the price same class of thing? If a shelf of 100 cans is priced using buy 2 get 1 free, how do you value the stock? This is an ideal shorthand data, but be careful. Some of the problems are more subtle than they first appear. Goal of the kata is to practice a user style of experimental modeling or design. Look for as many different ways of handling issues as possible. Consider various trade-offs of each. What techniques are best for exploring model, recording model? How do you validate a model is reasonable or not? So, back. When we started looking at it, majority of things presented one solution. The purpose of the kata is to explore multiple solutions and compare. So now the word kata comes from martial arts, where the same set of steps are practiced multiple times, becomes a good. So the idea of kata is that you solve it, think about it, come up with some solution. Solve it again, come up with a different solution. Solve it again and come up with a different solution. So for me, I am probably attempting supermarket pricing kata 10 for 12th time. And every time it gives me a different insights. Every time I discuss it, it gives me a different insight. But more importantly, how do we approach these problems? Good kata is just one kind of problem. There are multiple types of kata, but how do we approach these kind of problems? So what are the design principles we talked about? We started with fundamental design principles. Fail fast, tell bonus, design by contract, and minimize the impact of change. Most important criteria is minimizing the impact of change. Now, to minimize the impact of change, we looked at object-oriented design. We talked about solid design principles, single responsibility, dependency inversion, discourse substitution. Then we saw also talked about two library or package design principles. One is a cyclic dependency principle. ACP, and what was the second? Stable dependency. Right. Now, how do we apply all these in practice? How do we apply it when we are working on a problem like supermarket pricing? Now, there are two things you need to consider whenever you are designing something. First thing is what is likely to change? What will remain constant? In this particular case, we are looking at pricing models. So what is likely to change is how many types of pricing models there are going to come. And then one of the things you need to consider in your design is what happens if a new type of pricing model comes in. How much of my design will get changed if a completely new type of pricing model comes in? And how do I ensure that when a new type of pricing model comes in, I make minimal amount of changes in it? Now, this is a criteria for any kind of. You cannot say that I adapt to any kind of change and your code should not change. That is impossible. So we are looking at strategic closure. Remember open close principle. Open for extension, closed for modification. So that is a principle you need to apply at multiple levels. So if in this case, it has to be open for extension, means I should be able to add new pricing model as much as possible without touching any existing code for the current. New pricing model should be a new code or new data, not even. Second thing you need to look at is scale. Yeah, and the scale again comes at various levels. One kind of scale is how many types of pricing models I need. How many instances of each of those models I need. How many customers that I have. If I'm applying the pricing model, in a day I'm applying it to 10 customers or 10,000 customers. And all this depends on who my customer is. So for this pricing model, let me give you a simple example. Let's suppose I am creating a desktop accounting software for grocery shops. So what is the appropriate pricing model design for? So let's explore that a little bit. So what is the expectation here that I install my desktop application to different grocery stores, and each grocery store may have its own pricing. Remember, grocery store owner is probably not a very sophisticated software guy. So for him, adding a new pricing rule should be very, very easy. If it is complicated, probably that's not good. Now, I cannot say that if you want to add a new pricing model, come to me and I'll add it. Because I'm trying to sell this software to maybe 1 lakh grocery store. Now everyone comes to me for support. That is the unsustainable one. So I create some kind of UI for adding a pricing model. If I have to give this to the end user, which is the grocery shop owner, then I have to create some kind of UI for adding the price. If I give him that, okay, learn this scripting language and add the pricing model, he is not going to. He'll probably not buy my software again. So what's the choice? I have to give him a UI. Now, if I give him a UI, and considering that I have lakhs of customers, each having a different kind of pricing model, there is no way I can create a simple, easily usable UI. Pretty soon I'll have to add and make it more complex. The moment I make it more complex, again, he will not be able to use it. And irrespective of how many conditions I do, there will be some models, pricing models that the grocery owner will not be able to map into my UI. So what is he going to do? What will he do? What do you think he will do?
It's out to us support platform.
Correct. So I have 10,000 different rules coming to me and saying add this kind of. Is that practical for me? What is the option you have? And I can say that okay, I will give it to you, but 3 months later. By that time, his season is gone. Right? So what do you think he will do? He will just say I'll calculate it and calculate, subtract it as a discount. That right? Either way, this is the fallback solution. The grocery owner has to be. With that in mind, think about it and tell me, is this feature even worth developing? Or is it easier to say that in my billing, I have a discount feature which you manually enter and that's it. That is how I calculate the bill. And it's not such a bad idea because think about it. How, as an individual grocery store, how many kind of pricing rules is going to have? 4, 5, 6. In a day, how many customers is going to get? Maybe 100. Right? Maybe the right rules are not applicable to every single thing in his shop. So if 100 customers are coming, probably 30 or 40 customers के लिए pricing rules actually applicable. 30 customers के लिए मेरे पास 5 pricing. So on an average, one pricing rule is going to be used by just 6 customers out of 100. With this kind of scale, is this feature worth developing? That is the first question you should ask. What is the scale? What is my development efforts for that scale? And what is the development efforts are your investment? What is the returns on that investment? If I'm looking at an individual grocery store as my customer and I look at the scale, the efforts, the investment, not worth it. And this exactly is the analysis the product engineer or product manager is supposed to do. Lot of times it doesn't happen. Or lot of times you are a services company where the product, this kind of product analysis is not in your hand. But you can still see that a feature not going to work. It's going to take time. It is going to have a lot of bugs or a lot of edge cases. And customer is going to pay. What you should do best? What do you think you should do in such things? You are a services person. And you are a services company, but you are developing a product and then somebody else is selling that product. And he comes up with this great idea, let's create a pricing. What you should do as a service? Blindly go and develop it. You get blamed later. Or you should say, no, it's not worth it, I will not develop it. But he's a customer, he's paying you for development, right? Can you really say no? So what choice you have?
To develop it.
Huh? Develop it. Yes, but you know what? One of the first thing yet you need to learn in a services company is called CYA. What do you think that acronym stands for? It's called cover your ass. So what does that mean? You guys are write a nice, polite mail to the customer. Look, boss, you have a great idea, but I feel that in your case, this will create more problems. And this is what I think. I request you to rethink this picture. And put it on mail, not on call. Remember, CY. So the customer will say, no, I'm great, please develop. Now you have on mail record that yes, I said you are stupid, but you accepted that I'm still going to do it. So later when he comes back and cribs you, कि तूने क्या इतना bugs क्यों आ रहा है, show him the. Why it is important? Because typical services company, the mindset of every person, not just any particular person. Something great, I'm responsible. Something screwed up, my services guy is responsible. Now, if you want to be wary and protect yourself, there are kind of things and analysis you need to do. So jokes apart, let's forget about our grocery store and look at that. I am now somebody like a big shop, maybe grocery store or a DMart. Now, what is my skill? Now things change a lot. Right? Now what happens? I have a DMart, but I also have a big IT department. The moment I have a big IT department, things change. Now the pricing rule doesn't have to be implemented with a UI or somebody कि नए shop में बैठा हुआ आदमी नया pricing rule है. That need not be. Which means to add a new pricing rule, I can add a new class into my rule. Your design constraints have not changed. Now having a UI to write the pricing rule is not so important. But because the DMart has hundreds of shops all over the country, the flexibility into it is more important. Audit trail is more important. For an individual grocery shop, audit trail is not so much important. But at a scale of DMart, audit trail is more important. Scale changed, constraints and requirements have changed. So that is why, if you remember, first thing I asked you when we are doing the design review was, who is your customer? Because the customer decides the scale, and the scale decides the constraints on the design. So any customer asks, I am doing web development. Great, right? But web development for CAD is radically different than web development for somebody like Flipkart. Somebody like Flipkart, what is the persistent state that you are going to have? Shopping cart. What is the persistent state if you are creating a building model inside a browser? Shopping cart I can store in a browser side cookie. Can I store shopping cart, my entire building model on a browser side index? Even though you are doing a web design, because the scale has changed, the typical Flipkart style design is not going to work for CAD. Or if you have worked CAD on web and you go to Flipkart, whatever design principles you use are not going to be useful when you go to Flipkart. With this in mind, how should I do? What is the first thing I should look at? Do I look at the technology now? Or do I look at the technology later? Remember I told you that I'm a department, I have an IT department. Right? Now what do I do? What is the next step to do this with? I can add classes, I can add instances. Okay. So how I'm going to calculate? Again, forget about we are not reached to the level class hierarchy and all. We are just before that. We know that there will be new pricing rules that will get added. Now, when I create a bill, I know that once the bill and somebody has entered all the items, after that I have to run my logic, add the pricing rules, calculate the final price. Do I need to keep track of which pricing rules I apply? This is one question you have to take a yes or no answer, because that becomes your design structure. Do I need to keep track of pricing rules? Second, what kind of pricing rules I get? I have 10 pricing rules. Do I just check that how many pricing rules are applicable? Is that the only check I need? Let's say I have 20 pricing rules and I have a list of bills and I say, okay, 2 pricing rules apply. Great, I apply that. Is that enough? Is there a possibility of conflicting pricing rules? Is there a possibility for the same item, multiple pricing rules are applicable? Are pricing rules item wise or some pricing rules applied on groups of items or entire bill? If you buy shirt piece and pant piece together, there is some rule applicable. Then you are applying it on group of items. Or just pant piece, just shirt piece. What are the types of rules? At the design level, what is my idea of when I apply this? Now, again, remember, design is not a linear process. It is an iterative process. So you will think of some idea, analyze it, realize that it's a bad one, come back to first step, start working on the next step. There will be multiple iterations like this for any design problem that you are working. Majority of cases, we do just one iteration, whatever is the solution, we work with that. Bad if. And code kata are the kind of things where, at least in practice, as an exercise, you can think of multiple. You may not have that luxury because of time constraints in your real life. But you have to train your mind to think multiple. So we have multiple rules. Right. Now, remember, in a typical object-oriented design, rule, suppose, is a class. What is the instance of that rule? And how many such instances will be there in the system? So I get a bill, right? I create a new instance of the rule and apply it. Or there is only single instance of the rule in the system. I take that and say, apply this. What is appropriate for my? Are you sure? Remember, I am adding a new rule in my system periodically. Now, when I add a new rule, does that mean I add a new class or an instance of the class? Let's suppose that you take a rule and then you are creating a single instance of that class. Think about a rule which says that on buy two get one free. Okay. Now, is buy two get one free on a shirt and buy two get one free on a pant are two different classes? Because if you are saying single instance, they are two different classes. Or buy two get one free as a rule. One instance of that rule says buy two get one shirt. Second instance of the rule says buy two get one pant. Why you need to go to this nitty-gritty? Because singleton design and multiple instance design is radically different. Second option, is there a third option out of this? Why I am thinking of single instance or multiple instance? When I say multiple instance, right, what are my instance variable? In one case, one of my instance variable is items like shirts. Right? Another instance variable, same buy two get one free, is pant piece, shirt piece, pant piece. That is one of the instance variable. What do you mean by instance variable? It's a state. I instantiate the object, there is a state with that object. What other design option have? Can I create a rule which is completely stateless? Make a function call, no state. I have series of functions there. So each rule essentially I am implementing as one function. Is that a viable design? So what are the options you have? Singleton, multiple instances, with state, without state.
With state you understand, right? Class with a state, a class without a state.
If you have a class which has no data members, it is a stateless. Or if you have a method, typically a method is stateless.
Functions are stateless, right? I mean, so like a process thing.
So which one do you want to use? Now remember, our idea is to explore different positives and negatives of designs. So once you reach to that level, you ideally should look at, I want to create a stateless design for this. I want to create a singleton based design for this. And I want to create an instance based design. What are the benefits and problems with each of these? Let's look at a simple design. For each rule, I am creating a class and then I am creating an instance of that. Like I said, in this case, buy two get one free for shirt requires a different class. Buy two get one free for pant piece requires a different class. add a class, you need to modify the existing system. Correct? So every new rule I add, I have to create a new class. And if I have 10,000 rules, I have 10,000 classes in the system. That is the implication when we say that there is going to be a single instance of it. Is that a good design? Remember, what is our basic principle? Open close. Open for extensions, close for mod. Is it open for extension? Yes. Your new rules, you are adding a new class. Then what is the problem? We also have to look at what is my long-term maintenance cost. What is my output? More code I have, more maintenance requirements. So what's the alternative then? I create instance of that. Now I have one benefit. If I want to create instance of that class, I need not or may not have to change my code. Let's suppose I put the rules in the file or in a database, and I have 10 rows. I read the rows from the database, created 10 instances in the main. Do I need to change the code if I want to add 11th instance? So then I create a category for buy to get one. And with that category, then I can create. Now the next question I have, when I have a class, things are simple. One rule, one class, new class added into the system, new rule added. Now if I'm not modifying the code, where should I store the rules? Remember, these are questions coming from my existing analysis. As I go one step and decide, okay, I want instances of this. Then the question comes in, where do I store those instances? I cannot store them in class because I don't want to change the code. But I still need to store the rules somewhere. What is the best way to store them? What are the options to store them? What are the options? Come on, where do I store the rules?
Database or JSON.
Okay, database, one thing. JSON, where do I store the JSON? It's a format, right? I have to still store it somewhere. Where do I store it? Oh, means what?
S3 kind of file system.
It's still somewhere a file system. Right? Now, if I'm storing multiple rules, do I store all the rules in a one single big file? Or I split them? Split them. Okay. Now the next level of complexity comes in that my rules are not going to be static. At some point, I will have to say this rule no longer applies. When that happens, do I delete the rule or is delete the rule file or not?
No.
No. Why not? Okay. Then what I should do? If I'm storing it in file system, I have two options, either delete it or move. If I move it, how do I know and keep track of which are my deleted or removed rules? And if I'm creating a billing, and that billing has a reference to the rule, and now I moved the rule, how do I keep auditing? You know what I'm doing? So far, I have not run a single line of code. What I'm doing is thought experiment. I take this decision that let me store it in a file. What are the fallouts of this decision? What are the options I have there?
Archive it kind of, or tag it as some target kind of.
Okay. One possible option is I don't delete the file, but I add a property in the file. Well, this thing is now archived. What is the fallout of this decision? Remember, I'm debugging. I'm adding rules every day with some or the other. Right? So there are lots of rules getting added. There are lots of rules which are getting say that okay, now this rule is archived. And it's all in a single file system. So when I start, somewhere I have to read all those files, figure out which rules are still applicable and which are archived. So far, so good. Now imagine I have 10,000 rules which I need to read, but my active rules are 500.
You need a database. This pointers to file path.
So then, is storing the rules in file system a good idea?
Unnecessary. Unnecessary kind of. The same information can be stored in the database.
Store it in the database. Does that solve my problem? I have a rule and I discover that there is a problem in this rule. What options do I have? Do I modify the rule? Or do I create a new rule? What happens to your audit trail? And yes, it is not always wrong to look at it that way. But that should not be the only criteria. It definitely should be the criteria that my current devs are comfortable with these technologies. Why we should look at that? Huh? One is maintenance wise, but it also today's world, there are a lot of other things that you get to be looked at. You have developed DevOps pipelines configured for your choice of technology. If I'm compatible with Java and I already have a DevOps pipeline for Spring Boot with all the static code analysis and everything configured, I go to new technology, I have to reconfigure. Is a cost. Maybe worthwhile to take that cost if there are significant benefits of that technology. Exactly same way when you're choosing the data. By default, some people jump, oh, new thing, one stack. Why? Everybody uses it. Horribly stupid way to choose anything. Horribly stupid. You know, all these guys have a very weird thing. In case of fact, they want to be individualistic. But technology, I will choose whatever everybody is using. But some companies probably say that we are Microsoft chunks. We use, for everything we use Microsoft. Again, positive meaning. So let's suppose you are Oracle, which means what? Your IT guys are comfortable with using Oracle. They are comfortable with setting up Oracle. They are comfortable in say backing, taking backups, doing restores, making sure that you can set up an Oracle cluster, failover. It's all the specialized skills. Now suddenly you want to go to MongoDB. You have to replicate all these infrastructure things for MongoDB. If your IT team doesn't have that skill, which means recruiting someone. As a development team, should you consider these aspects or you should not consider this? You should or you should not.
If it's a previously problem, you may not, but then it's not a view.
Yeah. The lot of cases POC is converted into production. It's a stupidity. So with that in mind, what are your technology choices? Let's say you are already using RDBM, so you want to use that. And maybe you are a Java shop or a .NET shop or Node.js, whichever one. You want to use that as a server thing. Now with that in mind, now you have to go back and say, okay, with these technologies, what do I have? For example, Java has a reflection. So using reflection, I can load new derived classes into my existing code without modifying it. Dependency injection frameworks are available for Java, .NET, Node.js. C++, very messy to do dependency. So if the moment I choose, say I'm going to use Java, and I already have a dependency injection framework, or maybe you are using a dependency injection framework like this. Now you have a design choice that yes, I'll make my rules. When I add a new rule, can I configure my new rule in such a way that use the framework that I'm already using and reload that new class? So if I have to add a new rule, an entirely new class of rule, then I should be able to reuse the whole system just by adding a new. What else? Instances information I'm going to store in the data. The moment you do that, the moment you say that I'm going to store it in the database, it is going to add few more design constraints to it. You know, I have multiple instances and I have a category called buy one, get one free. That is my category or that is my class. Do I map class to a table? Or do I store all kinds of rules, irrespective of what is their category, in a single table? Remember, MongoDB is a document database. So I can create a collection called rules in MongoDB. And I can store all kinds of rules as JSON in that, each having a different JSON schema. I can still store them in a single document. Can I do that in database? I have to decide what are my columns. So if I have a buy one, get one free, then I'm going to say, okay, buy one, what category? Buy two, get one free. Free, what category? So buy two shirts, get one pant is free. Or buy two shirt spaces, get one shirt piece free. So I have two parameters in that. But is the same thing applicable if I have a new kind of rule, like 10% discount? Each of these requires a different variable, which means a different database column.
An extensible one. It will require a column and the runtime.
So every time I add a new class, do I make a schema change and add a new column in my table? Is that a good sustainable design? Remember, I'm using a dependency injection framework that requires a class name. Do I store the class name in the database? So I want to read from the database, read the class name, use reflection, instantiate the class, read the row from the database. Now I can add new classes without modifying existing code. That sounds perfect. But is it a good idea to store class names in the database? What if I want to move the class from one package to another package? The moment I say that I'm storing the class names or class paths in a database, I'm adding additional restrictions in my future code development. That means I cannot change the package of that class. The moment I have that requirement, I actually have a requirement on the developer. That first time developer takes a decision on which package this class will go to, he has to put a lot of thought in that because you cannot change it. Now, if I create per class, I start creating a table. Is that a good idea? Because I may have 25, 30, 40 different categories. And those many tables will get created. we also need an audit trail and a version. For each row needs to be a version. So we have 40 tables where we need version. How do I do that? Now, a lot of databases, RDBMS, like class inheritance, have a table inheritance. The advanced feature, and it also has some downsides. Do I use table inheritance or not? Could be problem. But I have that option. So as a design consideration, I have to look at, okay, will table inheritance work in my particular? It is still going to create those many tables. But at least the common data for tables I can group, or I can group the logic of version in the table. What is this?
We have some version. You can use NoSQL based version.
Not very easy. The versioning part still use it in the project.
Combo file and database. File would get version by date, and the root can be on, and the references would be on database.
But see, when I change the rule or when I version the rule, my calculated results are going to change. So if I'm looking at audit trail, then as part of the audit trail, I will also have to keep track of which version of the rule I used in. As of now, I can think that I need to solve versioning problem, and I can defer it little bit. Think that this will be a low level design. I'm documenting it. It's an issue that I need to solve, but I don't need to solve it immediately. Remember, it's a iterative process. So some cases I can just identify the problem and say that defer, I'll defer this later. Why it makes sense to defer this later?
The systems we choose can do it both beside and separate.
Exactly. There may be an existing database system which gives me versioning, or maybe I am going to take 1 year to develop, and Oracle already has a roadmap to support versioning in the data. Don't think that every problem you need to solve immediately. Second is, now if you think about it, versioning is a low level design issue. Right now I am in a high level. And it's very tempting when you realize things like versioning. Suddenly you want to jump and solve it. You have to learn to resist that temptation. I'm in a high level design, so any low level design issue, I need to identify, document, and say I'll come back to this, so that I don't miss. But I don't have to solve it immediately.
Maybe a pointer to identify, high level design and low level design, something that we can do.
So what other things we learn about design? Top-down design. Break it into modules and then define. So what is a good idea? To keep all the rules in one module? Keep each category of rule in its own module? Like I all buy one get one kind of rule, or all individual item rules in one package, all grouping rules in one package, or entire bill based rules in one package. If this is the case, what should be the hierarchy of these packages? What kind of dependency is the package built? So far, I'm talking only about rules package, but there are associated packages in the system. So, what level should my rules package be? Should it be at the bottom level package or should it be at the high level package? And why this decision is important? Remember, we have stable dependencies. Any bottom level package has to be really stable, because everybody else is going to depend on. When I say it is really stable, what am I saying? It cannot change. But then what is my requirement? I should be able to add new rules. The moment I have this kind of requirement, I know that package cannot go to bottom. It is changing fast, so it has to be near to the. Not too many packages can depend on it, because otherwise my whole system becomes unfair. Is my entire rule system like that? Or am I going to create a hierarchy of rules? If I have a hierarchy of rules and I have something like a rule-based class, should the rule-based class be also at the top? Not necessarily, because it's an interface or a basic. It may be way more stable than the derived classes. Does that mean I split the package where core rule package goes at the bottom, doesn't get changed? And the derived rules that I want to add new, look at that, remain at the top. What am I doing now? I'm breaking packages, but also applying dependency motion. My high level packages should not be dependent on the actual rule. They should depend on rule interface. And then I add rule interfaces or new implementations of the rule at the top without disturbing the whole system. That is where dependency inversion comes in. That is where stable dependencies principle comes in. That tells me where my new classes and packages should go. Okay, I have two components. My rule framework is stable. That should go to the bottom. New rules that I'm getting are volatile. That should go on to the top. If they are on the same package, I have a confusion. Where do I keep this package? If I put it in the bottom, there are a lot of volatile classes. It doesn't work. If I put it at the top, there are a lot of stable classes, like the rule framework. That also doesn't. So one of the decisions on how to package classes is to look at, is this class volatile or stable? And if I have a group of classes, all of them together have to be either stable or volatile. If they are partly volatile, partly stable, you are confused about where to keep it. When you have those kind of classes, you have to split them to two packages. And that is where, when you're defining initially, and each class has to go to which packages, and how many packages I should have in the system. Now you have answered that. I need to add new rules, which are going to be like my concrete rules package, and I have a rules framework package, which is stable, which goes at the bottom of the class. My package.
going to take a minute. So this is the gem of a concept. Does everybody understand till now the story? Because ये बार बार दिमाग में आएगा what is changing, what is not changing, जो change हो रहा है वो ऊपर रहेगा, dependency कैसे है. This is how you start from the top, thinking and change basis के साथ discussion चल रहा है, right? Very very damn important. You might be doing it subconsciously and you might not be doing it, but now you have a very good golden simple rule. Your dependencies, which are changing more, is at the top. They're changing less at the bottom. And if you have a module means DLL or a project, you have to split it so that you can move it up and down. Right? Are we good till now? Anybody any questions? Okay, so I just wanted to take a
So far we looked at what design. We looked at the cyclic dependency. We looked at stable dependencies. We looked at open source principle. We looked at dependency inversion principle. Right. Where does my least cost substitution principle come in? Least cost substitution tells me that I have a rule framework and I want to derive a rule class from. Is my derivation variable? So it somewhat happens when you are at a low level. When you are doing a high level design, least cost substitution may not immediately come in. But interface segregation does come in. Which interfaces go together in this package? That is a decision you need to take.
And then the second, the packaging of module process.
All of this fundamentally depends on what? Minimizing the impact of change. We are looking at stable dependencies and splitting the packages. Why? Because we want to minimize the impact. When a new rule is added, we don't want to discuss it. That is why it has to be at the top with very less dependency. If I put it at the bottom, where a lot of dependencies, coexistence becomes.
So one thing. So top and bottom you understand, right? Because when you change the class, and suppose for building that class only, there's so many include headers, so it goes into other classes, DLS and all, right? So it should be minimum. If it is minimum, it is bottom. So if you want to know if a class should be at the bottom, see headers, and so there are some rules basically you can use it. But compilation, if it is lesser to compile the class, then it should be at the bottom. If it is more dependent, that is on the top, right? And that's correct, right?
Yes. So I want better one is a group rule. But my group rule base class is in my base rule package, rule framework package. And this is my rule implementation. So this is a higher level package, this is a lower level. When I am doing designing, once I have this level of package done, the first thing I focus on is designing the bottom level packages and the classes in those bottom level packages. You understand? I have created a categories of rules. I put them in a rule framework because I know those categories are not going to change fast. But the implementation of each of this category, like there is a group rule category or an item rule category. Item rule may be there is a discount of 5%. Or a billing level category which says that for an entire bill, if you pay by ICICI credit card, you get 5%. So I categorize this and categories I added in the rule framework. Does that mean I never add a new category? No. It is possible, but you have to remember that when that happens, there will be significant amount of changes that may happen. If I'm adding a new rule implementation, my framework is stable, no other rules will get in. And I may create multiple packages where I say there is a package for group rules, there is a package for item rules, there is a package for billing level. I have a way to split it into multiple packages. The moment I do that, I have to focus on what is going to be my rule framework. Which classes will go at rule framework level, and is there a hierarchy inside that package? Like I have a base rule class, then I have a group rule class derived from it. Do I need a base rule class, or I create 3 independent classes called group rule, item rule, and bill level? Do I need a commonly rooted hierarchy, or do I need 3 separate class hierarchies? Both are valid design choices. Now, what should be interfaces of this class? Can I blindly go and look at this class? Not always. Remember, Viscous substitution principle exists. So while you are defining these base classes, somewhere you have to look at and say, okay, how do I write by together? Which class I derived from? Any interface or abstract base class you have to look at a concrete derived class from it to see if it is satisfying all the requirements of derived. You cannot define abstract classes without looking at which classes are going to be derived from. Remember, is a very strong relationship that has. So composition decisions you can differ a little bit. But the derivation decisions, abstract classes and their interfaces, you have to decide what are going to be methods inside these classes. Because these methods are actually going to be implemented by your derived. So does derived class have sufficient information to implement? I define some method, but does derived class have sufficient information to implement that? So that is a back and forth I'll need to do by taking few examples in each class and looking at, okay, to implement buy one get one free, what do I do? Do I derive it from a single item or do I derive it from a group item? Which one is better? Are there any scenarios where I need to derive from item as well as group both? Is there any scenario like that? May not be, but that is a thought experiment that you need. Now at this point, you are going back and forth between two packages. One, you are taking example of buy one get one free, and that using that you are defining the interface of the item. One example does. Then you have to look at, are there any other items looks like? What are those? So far, I have looked at only the scenarios where individual item is there, right? What if I have something which is instead of number of items is based on the weight or the quantity? Do I need a different kind of rule there? Now, in this case, do I define it as a different kind of rules or different kind of interface? Remember, I started by saying I am the one, right? So I have an option to say the interface here, right? So I have a group rule which says buy two get one free, but I have also another interface which says that it's a quantity based rule, it's a weight based rule, it's a count based rule, and when I actually implement it, I'm implementing two different things. So I started by saying I need a rule framework. I had no idea what classes to put in. But now I'm thinking maybe I need a base class. Maybe I need a group, maybe I need an item, Maybe I need a billing rule. Maybe I need a quantity-based rule. Maybe I need a quant-based rule. 6, 7 interfaces already added. But I'm not looked at what is going to be the data or methods of that. But I'm looking at, I will probably need something like this. For this probably need something like this, I'm taking a concrete example. With this design, how do I implement buy one get one? When you're doing all these thought experiments, remember it's not just one person who is doing the thing. You have a group of people and it is going to be a debate. And all of you will probably have strong opinions in some particular area and it is going to be a fight. It's okay. Best design comes out of fight. But remember, you have to have strong opinions. If the other guy has a strong argument against your opinion, you should be ready to change it. Very important. Don't get stuck on some dogma, on some design. So interface segregation, like quantity-based interface and a group item discount to separate interfaces. Discourse substitution. Is my derived class going to work with this base class? Open close principle. We already looked at dependency inversion when we split these packages. Stable dependencies and uncyclic. Now, do you realize why I was asking you? Have you used any of this? Because those principles are going to guide your design. If you ignore them, you are going by your gut feel that design may or may not be. And you cannot explain your gut feel design. Why it is good. If I split these packages, I should be able to say, look, it is based on stable dependencies. I'm adding new packages here, this different stable. I cannot put them in the same package. You have a reason why you are splitting this package and why that one is a high level of. Now, with this in mind, we took a decision on storage, right? Where to store them. And there is still a debate. We are not able to come to a conclusion that it is a good idea to store it into the file, or it is a good idea to store it into RDBMS, or it is a good idea to store it into NoSQL. What does that tell you? The moment you are in this kind of dilemma, you will have to think that, suppose I took a decision that I'll go with the database, and 2 years later, I'll get a requirement which is never satisfied by the database, and I want to change my storage. What will be the impact on me? And if I feel that potentially that requirement is going to come up eventually, how do I change my design so that replacing the storage should not impact the large scale code? What is the problem with microservices? What is the positive of microservice? What is the problem with microservice? Who said microservice? Yeah. It's a choice that you need to consider. Absolutely no issues. What is the positive? What is the negative? Do you know that? Then you are able to say, is microservice a good solution for? Definitely consider it. I'm not saying it's a bad solution. Dig deeper and say why you are suggesting microservices. Okay, so what does it tell you? First, you cannot retrofit microservices. You have to design from day one with microservices. Right? Now, if I'm thinking as a microservice, okay, what does that tell me? My interface of the microservice has to be stable. Only then I can change the implementation. Right? What should be my interface? If I'm defining at the interface level, is there a conceptually a big difference between defining a Java interface and defining a microservice? So at the concept level, can I think of what is my interface going to be? For that interface, I'm going to create an implementation. That implementation may store into a database or may make a microservices call. Makes sense? So what should be interface for storage? So what does that tell you? Dependency inversion is a great way to defer the decisions. I have no idea which way to store them. So I want to defer that decision. The moment I want to defer the decision, what is the choice I have? Define the interface and say that implementation will come later. But defining the interface is not so easy. Now you know potentially I have three choices. I can store it in file system. I can store it in database, RDBMS, or I can store it in the NoSQL. So essentially, my interface has three potential implementations. And the abstraction I'm creating at the basic level or the interface level has to cater to requirements of all three possible implementations. Defining interface is a hard problem because you have no idea what kind of implementation to do. And that is where you have to be careful in defining the interface. If your interface has only one implementation, you don't need interface. I have seen a lot of Java and .NET code where you have interface and implementation, and you take an interface pointer and cast it everywhere to the implementation. So why splitting them? What's the benefit you are getting by doing a split? If you are talking about mock, you can do a mock by derivation as well from your class. But what will work in just one CS file, you have split into two CS file and increase your efforts of maintenance. At the same time, when I'm defining the interface and I have potential implementation in mind, I have to do a thought experiment and say, okay, with this interface, how do I create a database implementation? With this interface, how do I create a RDBM or a MongoDB implement or a file system implement?
I'm not realizing that abstraction की abstract thinking ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है. Abstraction बनाने के लिए abstract thinking ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है, which is not very unless you keep on thinking on hierarchies.
Because remember, the moment you say interface and implementation, it has to satisfy Liskov substitution principle. Any function which takes an interface should be able to take any implementation. If you are writing a function and casting the interface into a particular implementation, that is not a good way to do anything. So we had a choice where to store. We decided that okay, we'll defer that decision by creating a I rule storage interface. Now, where should I rule storage interface go? Should it be in the rule framework or not? Should it be somewhere above rule framework? Should it be inside the rule framework?
Besides, these are
Or because it's a storage, it is actually a pretty low level concept than a rule. Should it be here? Where does this go to depend on what kind of dependencies you are in? Are you looking at a storage interface which will work on something other than rule as well? If your system requires a generic storage interface, it will be here, I suppose. If you are creating a very rule-specific storage interface, it will be either here or here.
we want it to be dependent at least a bit.
Because if it is entirely iStorage, then it cannot have any dependency on the rule. So it should be either parallel or below this. If it has dependency on the rule, it can be in the same package or it can be in a package above this. What are the implications if you put it above this? If I put it here and say that, okay, I have a rule storage interface and that depends on the rule framework. The moment I have this kind of dependency, I'm saying that any of my rule framework classes cannot have any function which takes I rule storage as a parent. Okay. So I can have a I rule storage which takes a rule pointer, but I cannot have a rule.save method which takes a rule storage point because it is above. If I want a flexibility that rule storage can depend on rule and rule can depend on rule storage, they have to be in the same package. Otherwise, I have to take a decision that rule storage depends on rule or rule depends on the rule storage.
Are we all on the same page? Maybe I'm asking again. ये last वाला
Take a minute to think about it. It is not as simple as it sounds.
because we're connecting the dots which you guys were learning before, right?
So one of the decisions we need to make is I have broken things into packages. Now I am adding a new class. This class we should go in which package? The interface of the class decides it will go in which package. If I have I rule storage method that has a save rule method and takes a rule object as a parent, I can put it here. But I have a I rule method that has a dot save method and that takes a storage as a parent. Then either it has to be in the same package or it has to be packaged below this. It cannot be above.
Why? That's what it is.
Why it cannot be above? Because suppose I have a I rule. There is a dot save method which takes a I rule storage. And my I rule storage is here above. Well, I rule is below. It's a cyclic dependency and violates the acyclic dependency. So acyclic dependency principle tells you together with stable dependencies where it should. I think I have covered majority of principle in terms of how I will think about this. Of course, we have not reached to any particular solution. We have not created any class error. But these are the initial discussions we should have with your team before settling on one. And remember, as part of the kata, once you explore one set of solutions, try to explore another set of solutions and compare the contrast the solution. That is where you learn more about it. So out of all these thought experiments, how many you did? And do you think if you do this kind of kata experiment, the way we are doing for kata, if you do this for your project,
part of project.
will it help?
Ironically, high level design. The first thing we will do is to create better tools in the front.
Not entirely ironic. Remember, it's a loop. You're doing multiple iterations. So you have to do high level, that has impact on low level, do some low level, again come back to high level. So these things will happen. One thing you need to remember, design is never linear. So whatever decisions you have taken early, you will probably revisit them.
Usually we would use some kind of mind maps kind of because there's so many threads that you have to go and come back, go and come back, go and come back. So any suggestions? How should we brainstorm all of this?
When you're trying to solve a problem, you have a personal method where you stop thinking because pull you into it.
Yeah.
Don't come to any decision.
So initial high level design brainstorming, you should apply 80-20. Key 20% classes and concepts are defined at high level. Stop. Go to that. Again, in that, key 20% ka initial implementation, okay, do it in a small team. For the key initial 20-30% implementation. Then you entire team can run parallel for other. But you have to keep this mind, dependencies in mind, so that when you are doing implementation, you should not violate this. So one of the thing I find useful, and I used to do it in my team, is early on we'll create this package block diagram on what is the dependencies expected. So keep a printout and we put that printout in everybody's view. That is something you should see every day to see that I'm not violating a new or creating a new reverse dependency by adding some parameter to existing method, adding some derivation. So what do you think? If I give you another problem statement, can you design it the way we discussed it?
And faster.
Yeah, this took what?
That was
Almost 2.5 months. And even with 2.5 months, I was not happy with it. Now, I see people who use ChatGPT for this kind of thing. So, Kata ka problem statement, ChatGPT में डाल दो, फिर design it. Real life scenario doesn't work that. So remember, even if you want to use ChatGPT, it's a conversation with ChatGPT of multiple steps. एक prompt दे दिया, design मिल गया, वो आपको कभी अच्छा नहीं होगा. But the answer it gives, you have to kind of converse with ChatGPT. Where you have to look at all these aspects. Okay, you are creating a reverse dependency. What kind of hierarchy? You have given me 10 classes. Do I put them in one package or multiple packages? No problem in using ChatGPT. Because use ChatGPT like you are brainstorming with him. Rather than he's a guru, I ask a question and guru gives me an answer. And because it's an answer given by a guru, I never question.
But that is not in architecture.
Bad. I'm going to digress a bit, but since we have talked a lot about AI, I give you my recent experience of using Copilot. I was working with a video analytics project, and we were doing a video streaming on RTSP project. I use OpenCV library, and OpenCV library has a built-in way to extract frames from the RTSP. The problem is it introduces latency. You start getting frames which are like 3 seconds, 10 seconds behind the latest. So there are multiple ways to implement that. We tried all kinds of things on the net that people have suggested. Finally, I decided that I need to rewrite this. Instead of OpenCV for video streaming, I'll use VLC. VLC player. So there is a library called POP behind that media player called DVLC. I thought I'll use it. And I attempted it 2.5 years. And even though it is possible, how to do it took a hell lot of time to discover. Because I had to literally go through multiple documents. After 2 weeks, I gave it. This time, I decided to use Copilot. Converse with Copilot on various. So it gave me a sample code. I modified it the way I want, but then I faced some issue. It hallucinated and gave me some random function which was not there in the. So I had to ask, look, this function doesn't exist in this. It modified it as. With this back and forth conversation, what took me 2 weeks and I could not complete, I could finish in 3 days. Did I use ChatGPT solution as it is? No. He designed it as per mine. But what I could have taken me days to extract the information from multiple websites, ChatGPT gave me in the conversation. So it can improve your productivity tremendously. Instead of searching through 5, 6 different websites, it gave me all that information in the chat. But if I copy pasted code, it would have never worked for me. So it's a new tool. It's a new tool available for you. You have to learn how to use it effectively.
5 times productivity.
You know, one of my favorite proverbs for software developers is all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You need different tools, right? Yeah. Have you ever, like, you wanted to hire a carpenter and you get a carpenter and it comes with a one hatoda and nothing else? You give work to him. So if you are a software engineer, the only tool you have is a ChatGPT. You can't do better. You are like a carpenter with just hatoda.
Sentence when we would expand. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. if you once learn design patterns, you will always
Think, yes.
Design pattern should not be modified.
See, that is again, design patterns, many of things are for scale. But you always need to look at, do I need this level of flexibility at the scale that I have? Let's use abstract factory. मेरा दो क्लास का इंस्टेंस, two different class का इंस्टेंस होने वाला है. Why do I need abstract factory for that? I will use difference. But if I instantiate 10 different classes at different performance, abstract factory makes perfect sense. Any questions? So you want to attempt another design problem? Nobody is saying yes.
Even if you do the same exercise again, you may now come up with something else.
Which is fine. That's the whole idea of code balance. Right? You attempt it again, you come up with a different solution.
But if you're going to attempt it again, I mean, for people who work on it, very good, definitely very good. I think using the solid, using the concepts, if you're doing it again, that would be wonderful. Because at least you know the problem now and then focus on the design. Previously, it was like you were trying to understand the problem and design was going somewhere else. So I would still suggest people who know the problem to still attempt it again on the design side. And obviously, I mean, but this website has so many of the data, right? So we can pick some other problem, and then we can use both now. The design and problem design happening at the same time. Because that is what is usual work day, right? When you're working, you have to do both the things. You're trying to understand the problem and you're trying to design also. So I mean, we should reach there. Should we open a kind of a competition? I mean, this much of reference is given, right? I mean, Sir actually gave a lot of things. So maybe you submit a snapshot of your design and the best design we can award it kind of. So I think how many people we are here? You will count. With the approximate count, I guess. 50. Okay. I mean, good number. So it'll be very interesting, but if copy मत करना एक दूसरे के नाम not here. गलती से same हो जाएगा तो no problem. अब तुम अपने से झूठ बोलोगे यार और क्या? Let's try. So a week's time. A week's time. 2 weeks time. How many people can do it in 1 week? Before the financial year ends. That's okay, right? And I'm not sure if it is 15 days or not. Before the financial year ends, I mean, then I can give the award. Give a good award. Whoever designs best. Or at least 3 of them. But keeping in mind all the design things that we have learned. And not many things, right? S, O, L, I, D, and 3 or 4 things. They were total 9 approximately, right? 9 things is all include करने हैं. Okay.
अभी भी confident yes.
हाँ. I mean that's what मुझे समझ नहीं आ रहा कि मैं participate कर रहा हूँ कि and I'll be interested to collaborate, but yes. ठीक है, open करते हैं. Award money सुनना चाहते थे क्या? Okay, so 2 weeks before 31st March, submission to Nehal. कोई generally decide है तो ये तुम्हारे bombard रहेंगे. Only one snapshot of your image, nothing else. You submit an image which has the class diagram, the package, like package, and then probably classes, set of packages, hierarchies, I mean top-down architecture. That's it, nothing else. No implementations. But the class name should be defined, अच्छे होने चाहिए, ताकि पता लगे. वहाँ पे लिख दिया I rule. तो फिर भगवान भी पता लगेगा कि रूल किसने है. ठीक है. Good. I will. मैं इसके प्राइस मनी का क्या कहते हैं रिलीज थोड़ी देर बाद करूँगा. I'm doing the financial calculation. Yes, I'm good. We'll do that.
भाई तो इंग्लिश अलग लिखा है अलग क्लियर कर माला था माला था
Eroding value, you can start by defining a surface and landscape. But practically, implementation specific another export project. The moment that happens, I have to change that. The moment I change that, everything about it. If I want to avoid it, I have to do one more iteration. What are the potential implementations that are going to happen? I have subject. That reduces my incidences where I need to change things. If I do this up, there may be still a fourth or fifth implementation which I have not considered and still a result in where I will be forced to change things. So it doesn't completely eliminate the task, but it will reduce it if I make some judgment for easy implementation. So don't think of it like a process. Think of it like it's a iteration. So I do it first level of abstraction, then I validate that in class. If that requires some modification, I go modify that validate.
So mentally, I need some to start with this table. त्याच्यासाठी पण designing this.
That is why never consider the design. The way design process मला परत दोन validate करायचं.
Even within a function पण या टाइप डिझाइन म्हणून जातात काय चेंज करायचं मेंबर व्हेरिएबल चेंज करायचं GitHub Copilot.
तो GitHub Copilot में यूज करते हैं, Microsoft Copilot
नहीं for like for it for it.
कोड एडिटर में डायरेक्ट VS कोड मधून वापरतो.
Yes.
VS कोड मध्ये तुला GitHub Copilot आहे, built-in integration त्याची वापरतो. यासाठी जो Microsoft Copilot आहे तोच वापरतो. And it is more like conversation. I don't select a set of code and do one or two lines. Usually my prompts are four-five.
Depending on what you refactoring I found that
Refactoring really good. Refactoring करायचं असतं. Where is context? आणि where you are doing some kind of upgrade. Like मला C++11 पासून C++20 ला जायचं. So then I can select it and say refactor this code, replace for loops with for loops. Copilot does that amazingly. But majority of the cases, my coding is not that low level. Usually, when I'm doing coding, I'm looking at more conceptual level discussions, or I need to rewrite something from scratch. That level, Copilot doesn't qualify. Those are choices. What you are trying to do is you refactor करायचं आणि GitHub Copilot मला तर नवीन काहीतरी शोधायचं आहे, conceptually करायचं आहे. If I want to kind of maintain conversation going on, तर मग ते GitHub Copilot is so coding focused. तिथं होतं. Then I find Microsoft Copilot is good. Or otherwise I use Ola or GPT-4. GPT-4 also DeepSeek R1 माझा local setup आहे त्याच्यावर वापरतो.
Nowadays थोडं ते उलट परत झालं. आता टूल्स पण एवढे राहिला त्याचा पर्पज नाही. कुठलाही वापरा तुम्हाला देईल टूल काही ना काही चांगलं देईल.
आणि आता असं आहे ना की now that I have some hang of what kind of forms I can give to Copilot, if I switch the tool, and a lot of times starting from scratch, and then 2 months later, everybody is catching up with everything. So then, what's the benefit? I switch to Cursor for 2 months and then switch back to Microsoft Copilot, but that will stick for 2 months.
CCTech solution to India. And normally, I think sometimes they have a lot of libraries do Autodesk even. And then they have, the code is not big, for example, now. But then, sometimes if am I doing right, am I doing wrong? So question click to rag wala part fill karta hai, and then you need to have a documentation also. So a small code pe agar better intelligence mil jati hai, I think that is what probably,
So Cursor or even Perplexity and ChatGPT now have this kind of, if you upload your files and you can do a RAG or a conversation on those files, OBS. Wherever I want to do that, I use GPT-4.
That's what I think. Upload to one nahi kar payenge.
But local GPT-4, all with I select a folder and say, okay, these are my local docs.
Right.
I am doing conversation based on that.
That'll be good.
It's okay. I am not a very great success on that. Okay.
मॉडल का साइज छोटा होता है और मतलब उसका इंटेलिजेंस शॉर्ट है.
इंटेलिजेंस शॉर्ट है, उसका जो रैक का फंक्शनलिटी है वो बहुत मतलब सोफिस्टिकेटेड रैक. That's where you have limitations in terms of what you can find.
We were using augment करके with a company हमारे पास आई. They said कि we're interested in understanding the test case. तो वो MFC refactoring वाला हम लोग प्रॉब्लम नहीं बात कर रहे थे. मैंने उनको बताया कि मेरे पास एक कोड है, मैं अभी वो MFC based है, and I want to break down as less with effort. Yes, so they were kind of suggesting कि ours is a fully RAG based and more intelligent. We tried actually, kind of it was okay, but again, शायद okay रहना नहीं. if it was very good, so then I think change it.
But for things like मेरा Python का code है, similar code I need in Java, or I have a existing CoffeeScript code I want to translate it to TypeScript. All these scenarios 90% automated. You don't need
Python का code Java JavaScript